Welcome to Founding Chronicles, your journey into the untold and shocking stories of early America. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a story from history's hidden corners. Today, we bring you the incredible true story of Charleston's vengeful slave, Amelia, who lured her master into the barn and set it ablaze on Thanksgiving in the sweltering heat of Charleston in the late fall of 1857. The Brackett plantation seemed calm to the casual observer. Its sprawling fields of cotton and tobacco stretched toward the horizon, the rows perfectly ordered, the workers moving with practiced rhythm. But beneath that ordered surface lay a tension so thick it could almost be touched, a tension carried by the enslaved who labored from dawn to dusk, unseen by the world beyond the plantation gates. Among them was Amelia, a woman whose quiet demeanor and sharp mind masked a simmering rage, a fury that had been nurtured over years of cruelty, humiliation, and injustice. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with skin like polished mahogany, eyes that could seem soft, but in truth observed everything, every small opening, every weak moment, every whispered conversation. She was nothing if not meticulous, and from the very beginning, she understood the power of patience. Amelia's master, Henry Brackett, was a man emblematic of Charleston's elite, proud, ruthless, and convinced of his absolute control over everyone under his roof. He was a man who enjoyed displays of his power, who punished without thought, and who believed that fear was the natural glue that held his household together. He had no idea that Amelia was quietly studying him, learning his habits, noting every way he could be misled, distracted, or manipulated. Every lash, every insult, every hour of back-breaking labor only added fuel to her quiet storm. The other enslaved people on the plantation noticed the careful way she carried herself. She did not complain, did not draw attention, and yet those who had been close to her knew there was a fire in her, one that could not be extinguished. The Brackett household was a small world of cruelty disguised as order. In the main house, polished floors reflected the opulence that masked suffering, and in the kitchens, the enslaved worked tirelessly to feed the very people who considered them property. Amelia's duties were varied. She cooked, cleaned, and tended to the children of the house, all while secretly observing the fragile structures that held the plantation together. It was during these daily routines that Amelia began to imagine a revenge. She knew that brute force alone would not work. There was no strength in confrontation that could match the authority Brackett wielded. Her intellect became her weapon. Small acts of sabotage, unnoticed at first, slowly began to weave a web that would culminate in the most daring act of retribution Charleston had ever seen. Amelia's plan did not spring from one moment of rage. It was cultivated over months. A patient layering of deceit and observation. She learned Brackett's habits down to the minute. She noted how he walked through the fields, when he inspected the barn, and how he lingered over small luxuries like his favorite pocket watch. She understood that a man like Brackett, confident in his superiority, would never suspect the one person closest to him, and she exploited this ignorance with the precision of a master strategist. Every movement, every whispered instruction to her fellow enslaved was calculated to appear routine. Nothing could give away the storm brewing quietly beneath her calm exterior. It was in the barn, a structure that had long been neglected by Brackett himself, where Amelia began to sow the seeds of her plan. She watched how the horses were fed, how the wood was stacked, how the firelight from the hearth flickered across the beams. The barn, in its decay, was perfect and unassuming stage for the act that would change the course of her life forever. For Amelia, the barn represented more than a simple workplace. It was a symbol of the power Brackett wielded and of the vulnerability hidden in plain sight. She began placing small, seemingly innocuous objects in strategic positions. A dropped lantern here, a scattering of straw there. Each step was minor, invisible to the inattentive eye, but each step brought her closer to the moment when her master's arrogance would be his undoing. The day that Amelia chose for the final act was no accident. Thanksgiving, a day Brackett and his family celebrated with indulgence and pomp, was the perfect cover. The household would be distracted, the air heavy with feasting and merriment, and the enslaved, expected to participate in service without question, would be overlooked in their movements. Amelia's knowledge of these patterns allowed her to choreograph a plan so precise that it seemed almost fated. She knew that in the moments when Brackett was most careless, the smallest spark could ignite a blaze that would consume everything he valued. And she intended it to do just that. But Amelia's strategy was more than mere fire and destruction. She understood the psychology of fear, the fragile ego of a man who believed himself untouchable. Each element of her plan was designed to humiliate Brackett as much as it would harm him. She sabotaged his tools, arranged obstacles that would appear coincidental, and ensured that every element pointed toward an accident, a tragic mishap, rather than deliberate vengeance. To the outside world, it would seem a cruel twist of fate. To those who knew her, it would be the justice that had been long denied. Her brilliance lay not just in her patience, but in her ability to manipulate appearances, to craft a narrative in which she remained invisible while the world fell into chaos around her dot by late afternoon. Amelia's preparations were complete. The barn stood quiet, the evening light slanting across its wooden beams, and every detail was in place. She had created a scenario in which Brackett himself, in his arrogance, would become the agent of his own destruction. She waited, her heart steady, her mind focused. This was the moment she had envisioned countless times, rehearsing every action in silence. She knew that one misstep could unravel everything, but she also knew that her careful study of his habits left little room for error. Every second she waited was a second closer to the justice that she, and only she, could deliver. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the household gathered for Thanksgiving, Amelia moved with quiet efficiency. She guided Brackett to the barn under the pretense of inspecting supplies, speaking in tones of deference and loyalty. Every step was a performance, every word carefully chosen to reinforce his sense of control. And all the while, the barn awaited, an instrument of fate perfectly aligned with her intent. The air smelled of dry straw, of wood aged and ready to ignite, and of the tension that now pulsed like a living thing through her veins. In that moment, Amelia embodied both calm and fire, the silent storm and the spark that would unleash it. When the lanterns flickered in Brackett's hands and the straw caught, the result was instantaneous. Flames leapt higher than the rafters, smoke curling toward the evening sky, and the master of the Brackett plantation found himself trapped in a scene that defied all expectation. Panic seized him, confusion clouded his mind, and the orderly world he had maintained crumbled in an instant. Amelia, moving with purpose, ensured her own safety while allowing the chaos to consume him. To anyone watching from afar, it was an accident, a tragic consequence of negligence. But to those who understood the silent intelligence of the enslaved woman, it was the culmination of months of meticulous planning, a quiet yet fierce retribution, delivered with precision and patience. By nightfall, the flames had burned themselves out, leaving only charred beams and smoldering ashes. The Brackett plantation, once a symbol of control and dominance, now bore the marks of reckoning. Amelia had vanished into the shadows, as she had intended, leaving no trace of herself, except for the legend that would grow in whispers among the enslaved, spreading through Charleston and beyond. Her act became a story of courage, intelligence, and the quiet power of a woman who refused to remain a victim in a world designed to keep her powerless. Amelia's story did not end with the fire. It continued in the memories of those who witnessed her courage, in the fear that lingered in the hearts of the Bracketts, and in the whispers that traveled along the Underground Railroad, carried from one enslaved community to another. She became a symbol of resistance, a testament to the fact that even in the darkest corners of slavery, intelligence, patience, and courage could overturn centuries of oppression. And while the details of her life after the fire remained shrouded in mystery, the impact of that Thanksgiving blaze endured, a permanent scar on Charleston, and a permanent mark on the history of resistance in America. The smoke from the barn still hung in the cold Charleston air the morning after Thanksgiving. The town had begun to stir, the sound of horse hooves on cobblestones mingling with the distant tolling of church bells. Word of the fire had spread quickly, though details were scarce. The Brackett plantation had always been the kind of place that inspired gossip, a symbol of wealth and authority, and now it inspired fear. Local authorities arrived promptly, but even as they questioned witnesses and combed through the ruins, the truth remained hidden. To the casual observer, it was a tragic accident, a lantern knocked over, straw catching too easily, a careless misstep. Nobody suspected that the flames had been guided with precision, that a mind, brilliant and patient, had orchestrated every move. Amelia had disappeared, as she intended, leaving no clue behind. Inside the Brackett household, the atmosphere was different. Panic and disbelief mingled with grief. Henry Brackett, the master who had once ruled his plantation with absolute confidence, now faced the fragile realization that his empire was vulnerable, that it could crumble under circumstances he had not controlled. His pride, which had been so unyielding, now turned inward. He walked through the charred remnants of the barn repeatedly, muttering to himself, inspecting the wreckage as if by doing so he could uncover the invisible hand that had caused such devastation. And yet no evidence appeared, no footprints, no misplaced tool, no hint of sabotage. It was as though the fire had sprung from the very air, punishing him in a way he could neither explain nor prevent. The enslaved on the plantation watched from the shadows, cautious but quietly triumphant. They had seen Amelia move with calculated calm, her eyes gleaming with intent, and now they whispered among themselves. Some were cautious, fearing reprisals, but others allowed themselves a small smile, a private acknowledgment that the long-standing cruelty of the master had finally met resistance. Amelia had become more than a person. She had become a symbol of hope, a secret hero who reminded them that even the most powerful could be brought low. And yet, for her to be truly safe, she had to vanish completely, to erase every trace of herself from the memory of the plantation and its people. She had known this from the beginning. Amelia's departure was as meticulous as her plan. She moved only at night, slipping through narrow alleys and abandoned docks, taking advantage of the chaos the fire had caused. The Brackett household and the local authorities were focused entirely on the immediate damage: the barn, the livestock, the chance to recover some sense of control. Nobody noticed a single woman weaving her way through the city, blending into crowds of laborers, vendors, and travelers. Her knowledge of Charleston's streets, its hidden corners, and the routines of its people gave her an advantage no one suspected, and she used it with perfection, leaving behind no sign of her passage, except for the lingering sense of unease that haunted those who had seen the fire firsthand. The days following the fire were tense. Brackett sought answers, interrogated the enslaved, and scoured the city for clues. Rumors spread. Some whispered about a carelessly left lantern, others about divine punishment, and still others murmured darker possibilities. But none dared accuse Amelia openly. She had been careful, quiet, and compliant for years. Her disappearance seemed plausible as a sudden flight, a rare moment of fear, or a planned errand gone awry. The authorities found nothing. They could not and would not consider that a slave, a person they consider property, could outsmart the master so completely. In their minds, Amelia had no agency, no intellect, no capacity for vengeance. They were blind to the truth, and their blindness protected her. Meanwhile, Amelia traveled beyond Charleston, moving through small towns and rural settlements. She relied on a network of sympathetic individuals who, though wary, understood the stakes of harboring a fugitive. She assumed new identities, changed her appearance subtly, and spoke little of her past. Every interaction was measured. Every hand she shook was weighed for trustworthiness. She had learned quickly that the world beyond the plantation could be as dangerous as the one she had left behind. Hunters, bounty seekers, and opportunists prowled the roads, seeking those who defied the laws of property and hierarchy. But Amelia was a shadow. She was careful, patient, and relentless in her pursuit of freedom. Every step away from Charleston was a step toward a life she had envisioned for herself. Long before the flames licked the rafters of the Brackett barn, the legend of Amelia began to grow in whispers. Among the enslaved in Charleston, stories circulated of the woman who had struck back against cruelty, who had engineered a fire that left the master helpless. They told of her intelligence, her calm in the face of danger, and her ability to disappear without a trace. And as these stories spread, they carried a moral lesson as sharp as any blade. Oppression could be resisted, and justice, though delayed, could arrive in unexpected forms. Amelia had become more than a person. She had become an idea, a spark that inspired those who lived under the weight of slavery. Yet the danger never fully left her. Amelia knew that the Bracketts would not easily forgive, that rumors of her identity could eventually reach someone willing to hunt her down. She had to remain vigilant, shifting her movements from town to town, careful never to establish patterns that could be traced. Her life became a careful dance of observation and secrecy. She learned to read faces, to anticipate betrayal, and to trust only those whose loyalty could be verified over time. Every new town was a test of her skill. Every new ally a potential lifeline. She moved not out of panic, but with the same calculated precision that had guided her in orchestrating the barn fire. Months passed, and Amelia began to craft a new life in small increments. She found work in homes and inns where the owners were, sympathetic to her plight, though she never revealed more than necessary about her past. She studied, learned, and adapted to her new surroundings with an intensity born of survival. Her past was a memory, her fire a tool, and her mind a weapon. And though she remained unseen by the law, her legend continued to ripple outward. Word of the Charleston barn fire traveled through underground railroad networks, carried by those who sought hope, courage, and inspiration in dark times. Amelia had not only escaped punishment, she had become a beacon of defiance in a world determined to deny her humanity. In Charleston, the Bracketts struggled to regain their composure. The fire had left a permanent mark, a wound in the psyche of a man who believed he could control the world. Livestock had been lost, tools destroyed, and most importantly, the illusion of invincibility shattered. Henry Brackett became a shadow of the man he had been, haunted by the possibility that the fire had not been an accident. He interrogated neighbors, pressed the authorities, and demanded answers, but the city itself seemed to conspire with Amelia's absence. Each day that passed without a clue deepened his fear and frustration. And in that fear, Amelia's influence persisted, a silent, unseen presence reminding him of his vulnerability. Even as she moved farther from Charleston, Amelia did not forget those she had left behind. She watched for news, collected stories, and ensured that the spark of her action endured. She understood that her rebellion had been more than personal. It was a challenge to the system itself, proof that intellect and courage could pierce the darkness of oppression. Her life became a testament to resilience, a narrative of patience, ingenuity, and unyielding determination. And in that narrative, the barn fire remained the defining moment, the event that transformed a young woman into a legend whose story would be told in whispers, in letters, and in the memories of those who dared to resist. The months following her escape from Charleston were a test of endurance, courage, and intellect for Amelia. Each town she passed through presented its own dangers, but also opportunities to craft a new identity. She learned to read the rhythms of communities, to notice which doors opened easily and which closed with suspicion. Every interaction required care. One wrong word, one glance misjudged, and her life could end at the hands of bounty hunters, suspicious neighbors, or the law that considered her property. Amelia's eyes, always vigilant, scanned the streets, the inns, the markets. Every face held potential threat or aid, and she learned to differentiate between them with uncanny precision. Despite the danger, Amelia refused to live in fear alone. She sought out other enslaved people who had fled, offering aid where she could, teaching them the skills she had learned on the plantation. She shared methods of concealment, techniques for blending into towns, and ways to travel without drawing attention. But always, she was careful to reveal nothing of the fire in Charleston, nothing that could link her to the destruction of the G. Brackett barn. Stories of that blaze had already begun to circulate in whispers along the Underground Railroad, but Amelia understood the importance of anonymity. Her survival depended on it, and the survival of those she guided did as well. Her travels took her through river towns, sleepy hamlets, and bustling market cities. She learned to read maps, navigate by the stars, and move under the cover of night. She avoided main roads and bridges where patrols were common, instead using forest paths and abandoned back roads the few dared to tread. She carried only what she needed: a few changes of clothing, some dried provisions, and her sharp wits. Amelia had become a shadow in the landscape of the South, a person whose presence was felt only in the quiet shifts of the people she passed. She had mastered the art of disappearing, of becoming almost invisible while moving boldly toward freedom. But even as she moved, the world behind her tugged relentlessly. Henry Brackett, humiliated and enraged by the fire, had not forgotten. Though he could not imagine how a single woman had orchestrated such a calamity, he was certain someone had helped, that secrets had been kept, and that the embers of revenge were still alive. He sent messengers to neighboring towns, offering rewards for any information, interrogating anyone who seemed out of place. Amelia understood that the danger of capture was never far behind. Every day of freedom was a victory, but also a fragile one, held together by cunning, observation, and sheer willpower. Along her journey, Amelia encountered those who would shape her path in unexpected ways. Sympathetic abolitionists offered refuge, providing clothing, food, and safe passage. Some guided her through the tangled network of safe houses that had been quietly established in towns and cities throughout the South. She met other fugitives, men and women who shared stories of cruelty, loss, and survival. They became a moving community of secrecy, bound by a shared understanding of injustice and a commitment to protect each other. Amelia's reputation, whispered along these networks, preceded her. She became known as the woman who had struck back, whose intelligence had defied the expectations of her. Oppressors dot even in these moments of respite, Amelia remained alert. She knew that trust could be exploited and that betrayal lurked everywhere. She never stayed in one place too long, moving in irregular patterns designed to confuse anyone tracking her. She disguised herself with different hairstyles, clothing, and accents, molding herself into whatever identity the moment required. She learned to blend seamlessly into new communities, taking on the mannerisms and speech of those around her, becoming part of the scenery while remaining utterly independent. Every step was a calculation, every interaction a test, and Amelia's mind remained as sharp as ever, guiding her like a compass through uncertainty and danger. Yet even as she sought freedom, she could not ignore the weight of what she had left behind. The fire in Charleston had been more than an act of revenge. It had been a statement. Amelia knew that she had changed the balance of power, if only briefly, for those enslaved on the Brackett plantation. And though she had vanished, her actions continued to resonate. Whispers in Charleston spoke of the fire, of the impossibility of such an event occurring by accident. The enslaved carried her story forward, teaching younger generations about courage, patience, and the subtle power of intelligence as a weapon against oppression. Amelia had become legend, her presence felt even in absence, a ghost haunting both the oppressors and the oppressed with the memory of her boldness. The journey was not without hardship. Amelia endured cold nights, scarce rations, and moments of despair when the road ahead seemed endless. There were times when townsfolk eyed her with suspicion, when strangers offered food and shelter with hidden intentions, and when the memory of Charleston, its cruelty, its dangers, its lost friends, pressed heavily upon her heart. But Amelia had learned to transform fear into determination. Each obstacle she overcame was proof of her resilience, and each narrow escape strengthened her resolve. She was no longer simply a fugitive. She was a survivor, a strategist, a woman whose intellect and patience were her greatest weapons. By the time she reached the borderlands of South Carolina, Amelia's story had already become myth. Some said she had escaped to the north. Others claimed she had been taken in by a sympathetic family and now lived in comfort under a new name. The truth was simpler, yet far more remarkable. Amelia moved carefully, deliberately, always watching, always planning, ensuring that the power she wielded, the power to disappear, remained absolute. She left no letters, no personal traces, no whispers that could betray her. Her legend traveled faster than she could, carried in hushed tones and secret letters, inspiring hope, defiance, and courage among those still trapped in bondage. And yet, Amelia's journey was far from over. Danger shadowed her at every step, for Henry Brackett and those like him did not easily forget or forgive. The fires she had lit in Charleston had illuminated her capabilities, and they would stop at nothing to recapture or punish her. Amelia's intellect, patience, and courage would be tested again and again as she moved closer to freedom. Each new town, each new safe house, each new face was a reminder that the world she sought, a world of liberty and dignity, required vigilance, ingenuity, and a willingness to act decisively. In this way, Amelia became more than a fugitive. She became a living embodiment of resistance. Her journey through the South was a testament to the power of mind over circumstance, courage over fear, and patience over brutality. The fire she had set in Charleston was only the beginning. The fire within her, the determination to survive, to teach, and to inspire burned brighter than any barn ever could. And as she moved through the shadows, every step further from the plantation, every mile toward freedom, she carried with her the promise that oppression, no matter how absolute, could be challenged by a single, brilliant, determined woman. As Amelia moved farther from Charleston, the landscape gradually shifted. She crossed rivers and forests, passing through towns whose streets were unfamiliar, whose faces were unknown. Each step brought a mixture of relief and tension, for freedom remained elusive, fragile, and fraught with danger. But in every town she entered, she learned, adapted, and moved with a careful precision that had become second nature. She had become a master of survival, a shadow weaving through the fabric of a society that had once sought to define her, control her, and break her spirit. Her encounters along the way were varied. Some towns offered kindness. Strangers took pity on her apparent laborer's guise, providing food, shelter, or guidance. Others were hostile, suspicious of a lone woman traveling with no clear purpose. Amelia navigated each situation with subtlety, speaking little, observing everything, and always ready to vanish if threatened. She developed a rhythm, moving at night, resting by day in hidden corners, and trusting only those whose loyalty could be tested. Every decision was deliberate, for even the smallest mistake could undo months of careful planning and end her quest for freedom. Despite the dangers, Amelia also experienced moments of human connection and quiet triumph. She met other fugitives who shared their stories, fears, and hopes. She discovered pockets of sympathetic communities, abolitionists, runaway networks, and ordinary people who quietly resisted the systems of oppression around them. In these encounters, Amelia found purpose beyond survival. She shared her knowledge, teaching others how to avoid capture, move unnoticed, and claim even the smallest measure of autonomy in a world designed to deny it. In doing so, she became more than a fugitive. She became a teacher, a guide, and a symbol of resistance whose story transcended the immediate dangers of the South. As the months passed, Amelia's careful movements carried her northward, toward states where slavery had been abolished, toward the promise of a life unbound by chains. She had learned to read the signs of freedom, the borders where patrols were less frequent, the towns with sympathetic populations, the homes where she could rest without fear. Her journey was slow, deliberate, and measured, each mile bringing her closer to a life that was once unimaginable. And yet, even as she approached safety, the past remained a shadow. The Bracketts, humiliated and enraged by the barn fire, still lingered in her memory. The fear they had inspired, the cruelty they had inflicted, and the lives they had controlled served as a constant reminder of why she had acted, and why she could never truly relax until she was far beyond their reach. When Amelia finally reached a town that offered both safety and anonymity, she began the delicate process of building a new identity. She chose a name unconnected to her past, altered her appearance, and learned the local customs to blend seamlessly into the community. She sought work that required skill but little scrutiny, allowing her to sustain herself while remaining invisible to those who might seek her. Her intelligence and adaptability served her well, for the world beyond Charleston was no less complex than the plantation she had left behind. Every decision, from where to live to whom to trust, was informed by years of careful observation and the knowledge that freedom was a prize earned through vigilance and courage. Even in her newfound safety, Amelia never forgot the fire she had set in Charleston, nor the purpose it had served. The Brackett barn had been more than a structure. It had been a symbol of cruelty, oppression, and unchecked power. By orchestrating its destruction, Amelia had sent a message, an assertion of intelligence, autonomy, and justice. That act of rebellion resonated far beyond the plantation, spreading through networks of enslaved and free African Americans, inspiring whispers of courage and defiance in places she would never see. The legend of Amelia, the woman who had outwitted her master and vanished without a trace, became part of a broader narrative of resistance in the American South. Her story endured not only in whispers, but also in the memories of those she had touched directly. Fellow fugitives who had learned from her journey carried her techniques, her lessons, and her courage into their own lives. Abolitionists and sympathetic neighbors remembered her for her ingenuity and daring, often speaking of her without ever knowing her true name or whereabouts. Amelia had transcended her individual struggle, becoming a symbol of the possibility of freedom, the power of patience and intellect, and the unyielding human desire for justice. Charleston itself remained haunted by her absence and by the consequences of the fire. Henry Brackett, broken in pride and haunted by the mystery of his loss, never fully recovered. The destruction of his barn was a permanent reminder that even men who considered themselves untouchable or vulnerable to those they oppressed. Among the enslaved who remained, the memory of Amelia inspired quiet acts of resistance, strengthened bonds of solidarity, and reminded them that courage and cleverness could, sometimes, turn the balance of power, even if only for a fleeting moment. In her quiet life far from Charleston, Amelia lived under the protection of her own intelligence and the anonymity she had crafted. She never sought recognition, never returned to the plantation, and never revealed the full extent of her actions. Yet the story of the fire, the careful planning, and the woman who had engineered it became legend, passed from one generation to the next. Her legacy was not measured in wealth or status, but in the inspiration she provided to others who sought freedom, justice, and dignity in a world determined to deny them. Amelia's tale is a testament to resilience and intellect, to the quiet but unbreakable spirit of a woman who refused to accept a life of oppression. It is a reminder that courage can take many forms, that resistance can be calculated, patient, and devastatingly effective. And it is a story that endures in American history, whispered along the paths of the Underground Railroad, remembered in the accounts of those who survived slavery, and honored in the legacy of one woman who burned down a barn, and in doing so, earned a permanent truth into the memory of a city and a nation, that injustice can be confronted, that courage can triumph, and that one determined individual can leave a mark that time cannot erase.